I think it's this type of conversations is one of the most amazing things I have the opportunity to do. Talk to fascinating people. Today we have a very, very interesting topic, which is talking about women leadership and the role of women leadership in the bilateral relation, which is how I had the luxury of meeting both of you for some time now. And I have the privilege for everybody that is joining us to joining and to sharing a seat on the board of the US-Mexico Foundation with Devry and with Pati at the US-Mexico Foundation. Our mission is to increase understanding of Mexico and the US, not only on the trade side, because I think trade is just one of the dimensions that this relationship has, but I think it's so big and so complex, but so fascinating also. And I think for most of us, it's a very positive relationship that we have to continue to nurture and to make sure that that it grows. And I think the most important thing that we're trying to do in the US-Mexico Foundation is getting people to talk. And that's what we have the possibility of doing this morning. So, hola, Devry, buenos días. Hola. From Mexico, and you in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, hi, how are you?
Fabulous. I've been looking forward to this discussion. I was so excited.
Very good. And of course, with Pati in DC, how you been? Great to see you here. Great to have the opportunity to talk to you today also.
Thank you, Emilio, for having us. It's a treat to be in a conversation with you too.
Yes.
You two trailblazers.
I think, I mean, you need no introduction. We've shared, of course, your bio, but it's just for you to click the name of these two amazing women, and you will see tons of information pop up in terms not only of how successful you are in your businesses, but I think I'm just amazed and grateful for the amount of time you dedicate to other things. I think this is so important when we talk. This space was built around sustainability, and not sustainability only from the environment point of view, but the environment, the social side of sustainability, and of course the development side of sustainability. And both of you are tremendous actors on this three-dimensional concept of sustainability. But today we want to talk about women leadership. And I'll just start with a quote that I got from Simon Sinek, who is somebody that I follow very often, and we philosophically I like his train of thought. But when he's talking about women leadership, he says it's not that we need more women in leadership, it's that we need more leaders behaving like women, and women are just better at it. Okay, so that for me it was fabulous. And one thing is because, and we'll get to diversity, which I think is actually the big picture of this, but when I reflect about the women's side of this diversity and inclusion, it's amazing because you are 50% of the world. I mean, it's a huge concept. So I'll start with that broad question on the need of more women in leadership, and I'll just kick it off with you, Devry, but then we'll just we'll wing this and see how it goes, right? Just as a very informal, pleasant conversation here.
Okay. Well, so, and stop me too, because I can keep talking, and I know that we want to have a conversation. So interject, Patty, if you're like, I want to chime in on that too. But
of course.
Because I reflected on this morning, I thought you could take this conversation really on so many different directions. And one thing that came to mind to me was someone who I really admire, a female leader, Kathy Matsui, who people may or may not know. Kathy actually is at one of the highest levels of Goldman Sachs. She's in Japan, and she is the individual who is responsible for coming up with this concept of Womenomics, which is the power of women in the economy, and convincing Prime Minister Abe of the fact that if Japan were to put in a more comprehensive approach to elevating women into the work world, but also into leadership. And that would have the single biggest impact on GDP, more than anything that they could have done on monetary policy, et cetera. And so Kathy was the one, and Goldman Sachs actually continues to issue their Womenomics report. She had her recent one come out on the progress on Womenomics. And why do I raise that? One side note, Kathy and I went to the same high school in a town called Gonzales, which is, a Spanish name, Gonzales, California, which when I was going to school, she was 10 years ahead of me. So we've actually never met. She's of Japanese descent. I'm of Irish and Dutch descent, but the town is 95% Mexican descent. So I just think this is such a fascinating connection. But the reason I raise Womenomics is I was thinking this is a way to kind of set the base, that there's no reason for us to continue as women who are highly capable in all aspects of leading in society to put out the statistics and the data on the impact. Where we now need to be going is, okay, what's the data and where are the metrics on how we're actually accelerating women into these roles? Because we know that there's, the case has already been made scientifically that putting diverse teams together is better for business, it's better for society, it's better for economic growth and social outcomes. So I thought I'd throw it out that way, Emilio, and start it, because there's a lot of different directions we can take, but this is one that's front and center for me.
And you know what? It's amazing. First of all, I thank you, because I had to do a little bit more research on what this means before talking to both of you. And I was amazed when I look at on the political environment, right? Only less than 10% of the world leaders are women. But then I started to dig into which countries, and then I looked at Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, and I say, no wonder why we think and what we know in the statistics and the data shows that these are some of the most successful countries in the world in terms of how they're looking at sustainability. So again, just going to you, Pati, in terms of this, of your experience on looking at the need of more women leadership and how you're seeing it on your environment.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, as you know, Emilio, I switched from being a political analyst to being a cook, and so it's been really eye-opening, to see. I moved from Mexico to the US, so being a Mexican woman in the US who moved from the policy research arena, which was not easy as a woman and not easy as a Mexican, but then going into the kitchen, where there's even more myths and preconceptions about who gets to wear the chef coat, because women get to wear the apron, but not that much the chef coat, like leadership positions in the culinary world are seen male driven, and as you were saying clearly, I mean, the irony is that there's a lot of efforts for women to support women and for women to raise women, which I think is fundamental. And I have a lot of women friends who say, ironically, the biggest obstacles that I've had have been women, because many women that get to a certain place, they've gotten there and they're kind of bitter and mad because they've had to go through so much, to get there, that they're like, people need to go through these too. But at the same time, I feel like women can't only rely on women. Coming from a house where I have 3 boys, I have 3 men here, and I'm married to a man as well, I feel that there's a responsibility that men have to open the space to women. Like, of course, women can support women and we can help each other, but we can't do this without men. So I feel that there needs to be this effort of re-educating the male population, in the concept of women, because they do see women as we are the nurturers, we are the caregivers. And there's a reason why the countries you are saying are so in tune with nature and with social justice because there's women, you know. But I feel like, where do you start? It's like the chicken and the egg. And I know, Devry, you have much more experience there than me. Like, how do you take on a campaign of re-education when you're trying to learn things that many men, it's not like they won't do it or won't allow it because they're mean or they don't want to. It's because they've been cooked in a broth that has taught them that that's the roles that exist and that's what there is, you know? So how do you open those eyes? Devry, I don't know. I mean, you have more.
I think that precisely on one of the conversations you and I had prior to this, Devry, you talked about the system and how the system, it's you know, the root cause of this problem, because it's evident. Again, the statistics show it. You know, 24 CEOs of the Fortune 500, but then we can go into the boardroom. I love the way you put it into the leadership gastronomy positions, and everywhere it's evident that we have the situation. So on the system, what's your take on the system and what has to change? And I love what you said about education, Pati, of course, and the male role, but can you give us your input on this?
Yeah, and exactly, and the system, and building on what Pati was saying about some of the bigger challenges and moving up the ladder have been other women, and so it's why when we talk about this, I don't say, okay, look, this is all just the male, you know, the men have to work this out. It's actually the system has to change. It's a system built on patriarchy, and frankly, I like to remind folks and myself, you know, when women here in the United States were fighting for the right to vote, which we just celebrated 100 years, imagine only 100 years in 1920, there were women against that. There were women against empowering women to fight for the right to vote. And so fast forward to today, there's still this notion, as Pati says, that, you know, like there's a perception. So when we talk about the education, it's educating broadly, you know, educating men and women on the reason it's important to have women, you know, rising in the ranks of leadership. And quite frankly, what I have personally experienced in coming up through also the policy world and then the corporate world is that the conversation very quickly devolves to, well, gee, if you put more, you're just going to put women in these roles, and I've been working as a man, and now there's no room for me. And so that's where you get caught, especially in the corporate space, or maybe even in the chef space, where people who are maybe the same age, you know, 40s, 50s, saying, I work just as hard to get to the C-suite. Why you and not me? So does that mean I have to give it up just for women? And that's the wrong way to have the conversation. The right way to have the conversation is, what is the right composition of leadership that needs to be at the helm of this company, this organization, this government, for the overall organization or society to thrive, and not just thrive, to grow. And that's why I say, you know, Kathy Matsui's data was so important, because for the first time she put that on the map and said, the more diverse your teams are, the more women are involved, the better off we will be. And you've just mentioned several governments and societies that are operating that way. When we think about the present moment, and there's a lot of conversation around companies shifting from profit to purpose, how are we going to do that unless we bring different perspectives to the table? Those perspectives that those women who are running those governments get, that they're not just going to be about GDP as the only indicator. They're also going to look at their social indicators around access to healthcare, you know, the amount of poverty and the poverty gap that exists, the pay equity gap that exists. So there are all these other indicators in the system that we need to be focusing on beyond some of the traditional ones that we focus on. And when we do that, that's when we bring women to the table.
Pati, on this same, the system, and you growing in Mexico, let me say, and coming from this side on you know, research and science and all that, very data driven, on a male dominated environment, certainly in Mexico. What was for you the most bizarre or toughest obstacles you thought that you were seeing that made you certainly uncomfortable? I'm not saying that's the only reason why you made the shift and reinvented yourself. And we'll talk about reinvention, but on the system, what's your take on it?
I mean, I think, oh my gosh, Emilio, there's so many, but I have to say that looking back, I feel like I came from that culture. I mean, I came from a house of 4 girls. You know, my parents are great, you know, but they came from that. I mean, I feel all cultures, all countries have their myths and preconceptions. And I grew up in a home where, I mean, my mom was the main breadwinner, you know, and my dad worked too, but it was, I think I grew up with these expectations of what women's role was and what women needed to do, and it was very Mexican macho. I mean, it was, to give you an example, and this is a silly example, okay? And this is really a silly example, and I don't know why I'm bringing this to the table because it doesn't have, well, it does have to do with economics too. When I moved to the US and I got pregnant and I was looking for a doctor, like there was no way in my mind that I could conceive of a female OBGYN.
Wow.
In Mexico, I mean, when I grew up in Mexico, there was no such thing, Devry. I mean, there was no such thing as, I mean, my husband's grandmother was the first woman psychologist in the entire country. And she dealt with themes of sexuality, and that was like insane in her era, you know. And we're talking 2 generations ago. But when I grew up in Mexico, I have 3 older sisters, doctors that you know, OBGYNs that deal with women having babies were men. So when I moved to the US and I moved to Texas, and I remembered neighbors started recommending women for doctors, and for me it was almost the religious view that it is the hand of a man that has to bring the baby out, you know, that it is the strong male hand, paternal figure. And was I wrong? Oh boy, was I wrong. I now have a woman doctor. But like, to go from that to this, it was like a shock, like cultural reevaluation, radical transformation of changing your beliefs, your, you know. And I know these I just took us off topic.
No.
But I just feel like like understanding how it is hard for people to change those beliefs, because I was one. I couldn't think of a woman delivering a baby. Like, how can a woman have the strength or the knowledge? Or, you know, in Mexico it was only men. So anyway,
that's I think it's just very interesting because it's like yesterday, right?
That's what I was saying.
That you had. My mom went to Ibero in Mexico City, and there were only 2 women going to university when she went to university in Mexico City. I mean, we're not talking about Hermosillo, Sonora, where I'm from. In Mexico City, only 2 women going to university, and this is, again, yesterday. So I think this is very important, and I think the power of re-educating the people on this is this has to change. I see it, for example, on the private sector representation in Mexico. Okay, all the different associations. Probably American Chamber of Commerce is a little bit more balanced, and I think it's because of the international ingredient that it has. But if you look at it, the profile is certainly male dominated, almost 100%. I think there's also this belief that we can only invite women if they are head of an NGO, right? Like, that's the only role available. Fortunately, we have more women coming into these leadership positions, but and it's also sometimes they call me, well, you're one of the young guys in the group. I'm 50 years old. I'm not young. Yeah, so
you're very young, Emilio.
No, I mean, for Mexico, where, you know, the majority of our population is less than 39 years old, and on the business side also, to have chambers of commerce and associations, cámaras with nobody 30 years old, and no women 30 years old. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It's amazing.
It's interesting. Did you want to go? So, am I interrupting or? Okay.
No, go ahead.
It's interesting that you're bringing up the concept of time, because that was what was on my mind when Patty was talking. Because while we come from two very different backgrounds, I come from a background where actually my parents divorced in the 1970s, and it was the time of the Equal Rights Amendment being, you know, front and center, and Title IX, which is something here in the United States that allowed girls, that kind of required institutions, educational institutions, if they were going to have sports for boys, they had to have it for girls. So this has just been in like the last, gosh, I'll tell you my age, 40 years. But that last 40 years, because of those types of things, that we've made major strides as women. So the fact that I was one of the first in our family and generation to be able to be in soccer and track and volleyball, and also been told I can be anything I want. You know, my mother was told she could either be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. She ended up being a teacher, which is one of the most remarkable leadership positions women have in society. But she also told me you can be anything you want to be. And so when we think about where we are in this moment in time, this is where I think the real awakening is taking place. And there's not only a gender divide, there is a generational divide. And I think why we're bumping up against so much tension is because we haven't been able to have this conversation in a way that makes the current generation of leadership feel safe. That, look, it's not about you being pushed. Yeah, it's not about you being pushed out. It's about you shepherding in the next generation of leaders. And inevitably, that next generation has to be diverse, but it also has to be women. And
let me just, because I want you to continue on this thought, because of some of the data I research, which I love data, but only we can make it into stories in order to make sense. Sorry about Lola, my dog. She's also has an opinion on women leadership, but is that because you talked about teachers, and it's where for a long time in the US, it was expected that you could be a teacher, or even in Mexico, that women could be teachers. But the data I saw, and I don't know, I assume it's kind of accurate, but only 30% of principals are women in the United States. So you allow women to be the teacher, but not necessarily the principal.
So that's just crazy, right?
It is.
And university presidents, and so Patty, I talk a lot, so you
No, I totally agree. And when you were saying about when you were growing up, the Title IX that you're saying, when I was growing up, in Mexico, we're a country of football, soccer. There was no women in soccer. I mean, did you ever see a woman play? I mean, it was not only was it not allowed, it wasn't even like imaginable. Like women couldn't even think about soccer. Like there were so many things that were male, women. And I remember when I switched careers from political analysis to cooking, you know, it's like your parents have the expectations. They want you to do well as a woman, right? Like, of course, we want you to study, but first you have to marry. You know, it's like these womanly things that you have to get married. And then when I switch careers, it's like, okay, great, you're doing something else, but you're going into the kitchen. That's like a housekeeping job. You know, that was like the first thing my dad said was like, o sea, ¿por qué te vas a meter? Like, why are you going to go into wash pots and like there? Not only was I going into like a field that was not really respected in Mexico, I feel like the trendiness about Mexican cuisine being, you know, heritage awarded and all it's been in the last 20 years when men like Enrique Olvera started, you know, jumping into in the food space and making it, you know, air and the torch and modern and molecular, which has been phenomenal. But when it was just women before, it was not that respected. And so it was not only you're jumping into something that's not that respected, but it's looked down upon. It's like a service job. You're never going to make any money there. And it's all these ideas about what women need to do, but also the spaces, like the cooking space was not and is still not respected. So for me, for example, hot buttons that I really am passionate about is like the roles of Mexicans in the US, then even more so the roles of Mexicans in the kitchen, but even more so the role of Mexican women in the kitchen and Mexican women immigrants in the kitchen. It's like it's another step, and then undocumented Mexican, immigrant women in the kitchen, and it's like one more punch, and at the same time, it's like you need to do something, but then what you're choosing is looked down upon because it is clearly a woman's role, but at this, cooking is a woman's role, but at this, it's like these double meaning. We want you to do good. We want you to thrive. You can be anyone. You can marry anyone you want. But then there's all these questionings and fears that. But you are going to get pregnant. You can't go apply for that job because you do want to have kids, right? So it's all these things. And I got into that, Emilio, when I started looking for a job after I finished a master's in Georgetown in Latin American Studies, and I worked so hard, and I got a merit scholarship, and I had 2 babies then, and I worked harder than anybody else, and people there were single, and I was working harder because I had the babies. It's the thing. But when I started looking for the jobs, it was, but you have kids, so you can only be part-time.
That's right.
I think one thing that for me too has to change absolutely is the perception of the value that women that actually stay at home. I'm going to say on the traditional sense. I hope if COVID-19 leaves something for us male that are part of that traditional family is the value and the hard work and the leadership skills and the leadership that it requires from also women that are on that role and that embrace it, because I think it's also important that you have choices. I think the women that wants to stay at home doing, I think, the most relevant activity of parents, which is the leadership of the family from education and all that. It's a very hard job. It needs to mean more value in society for those women and those men. I think statistically also there are fewer, but there are some that do it and say, I'm going to stay at home, taking care of the leadership of this office, which is the
Emilio, in the countries that you're talking about, where there are women presidents, it's a big percentage of men that stay home.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, I don't have the correct numbers, but I know that there's more men that stay at home as caregivers in those countries.
And I think it has to do with the generation of value for the family, other than maybe bringing a check home. And I think, this is the environment that I live in. And I think it's the most valuable activity that I've done at this house is the leadership of Trini, my wife. I mean, it's because, first of all, she also works, but doing a lot of things that traditionally is not considered work because she's not 9 to 5, thank God. And when you ask her, say, that's what I like. And the possibility of diversity, not only of in this case, it's this model of family, a man and a woman and 2 kids. There are many new, models of family and diverse families that are a reality and that are fantastic for the world. But it's this mix of roles that I think it's also very valuable. So I think if we don't value this possibility also, it's very hard to value the other ones, because then it's like success. Now it's only painted for those women that actually have a formal job 9 to 5. And I think it's a mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the, society is evolving, and you're right. I mean, COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink the roles and the structures. And we talked earlier about systems. And I am married to somebody who wholeheartedly, he's my biggest supporter and, advocate, 2 full-time jobs that we've had. And even when I would come home after, you know, after a big day, I felt the obligation to get the dinner on the table. And it's not that he wouldn't help, it was just that you fall into these old cultural systems that you've been taught. And if anything, COVID, by us all being under one roof, it's rebalanced everything. I mean, I'm in here starting, you know, my business, working with clients. My husband's got his office upstairs, but now all of a sudden we're both seeing the dishes dirty. And it's not that he wasn't doing them. I just was thinking, gee, I got to do that as part of my role. And it's just been this phenomenal rebalancing to a point that both of us are saying, what type of quality of life do we want? It's not necessarily what, you know, how much money do we want to make? It's how do we, and this is why I think those societies are picking the ones that are being led by women, they're onto something well ahead of us, which is we're only on this planet for a certain amount of time. We can work ourselves into the grave under the old system that where you get rewarded by, you know, the GDP going up and the you know, the amount of money you make, or we can work to completely rebalance that. So there's enough, you know, and I'm saying this in the context of capitalism, but that there's enough for everyone, and that we also can evolve as human beings to understand that there are other things that bring humans joy and gratification. So
I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Devry, and I think this pause in the world and these like radical transformation that we're seeing is really forcing people to reevaluate all the things that you're saying. And in a way, the relativity of how time passes, I'm sure you guys feel the same. Like for us, since March 15 to now, I don't even know what date we're at, like July 23rd, it feels like it's been one long working day, you know, like the way that time passes is so relative. And you think, and I always remember what my grandfather used to say. One of my grandparents actually emigrated to Mexico from Poland. He was escaping the pogroms, like around the time of the Mexican Revolution when he was a kid, and he came from a lot of hunger from, like, you know, farmland in Poland, and he was able to make Mexico his home. And he always used to tell me, like, the only thing you leave in the end is your name. You know, like, what do you want that name to be? And there, it's not, you know, for the encyclopedia or for whatever. It's like for your kids, for you, for your sense of pride. So I always think about like the decisions that I've made, and I know, of course, I've made many mistakes, but it is like the decision that about what I'm doing. Will I be proud about it? Not right now, but in 5 years, in 10 years. And I think that maybe it's how do we, in the theme of women, men, society change, like how can we make that, you know, a variable where people think about the consequences of their decisions, not immediately. As you're saying, there be people fighting for their jobs, right? Like, I don't want to leave my job. I feel threatened. Like that. And if they fear for right now, no? Yeah. But how can you have a like ¿cómo se dice? Oh my gosh, my English gets lost sometimes. But it's that I'm truly hoping that this time will help impact that for everybody personally. You know, what are the things that matter right now? And I agree with you. How much money do you want to have, right?
Yeah. I had a wonderful case 2 weeks ago of one of our women leaders in Prodensa, you know, coming to me and saying, you know, I don't want to work right now. I after all this, I say, you know, I want to go home. She was already home, but I want to be here. I want to enjoy my kids, and then I'll go back to work. So again, it's the power of having the choice. I think in terms of empowerment, is also that having whatever choice you want to have of possibilities. But I think there is this topic that we must talk about, and I think both of you are experts on the matter, which is the issue of work and family, because I think it is very strong, especially because of the system and how we have grown on it. I think it's especially hard for women in terms of this balance. Then we all have different beliefs. I think the connection of you know, moms and their kids is certainly stronger than fathers just biologically. I mean, You have 9 months just to use the number of advantage on us on the relationship, right? But then is what's your take on family and work and the challenge of juggling family and work? Because I think this is one of the biggest challenges that women face today.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because there was always this conversation in the last 10 years around work-life balance, right, in the corporate world, work-life balance. And then I had a great friend when I was living in China from IBM who said, actually at IBM, we talk about it in terms of work-life integration. And that really stuck with me. And of course, that would come from I'm a tech company, but there's, in my view, balance is in many ways unachievable unless we rethink what really matters to us. And so in the context of, rising up through the ladder and women in leadership, I began my leadership ascent right when I started having kids. I didn't have children until I was almost 40 because I had worked the whole time. And so right when I was hitting that cusp of going into the most senior levels of leadership, and being probably the youngest woman, actually not probably, the youngest woman in the corporate suite, the C-suite of a global company, I was the only one that looked around and said, okay, I've got 2 small kids, or I've got kids. And so it was.
But do you think, Devry, that that's why you were able to get to where you are and to have kids, because you had to work so hard until then? Like, if you had paused before, do you think it would have been much more difficult for you?
I've reflected on that, and that's the right question to ask. I think it would have been difficult no matter what, because I coach a lot of women in my neighborhood, some who have been out for like 12 years, who have raised their 4 kids, but who had very fulfilling, first of all, master's degrees, fulfilling careers, who are saying to me, well, gee, you've been in it, and now like I want to go back and I'm just not relevant. And what I say to these women is, I would hire you in an instant. Maybe you need to come up to speed on some of the technology, but you have been CEO of your family, managing 4 schedules, including your husband's, including yours, the budget, and by the way, you have the education. So one of the untapped talent bases across society are these women who, Emilio, have said, I need a break. That's okay. Take that break. What I'm doing in talking with these women is saying, the rules are gone. Anyone asks you about a gap in your resume, why do you have this 10-year gap in your resume? You flip it on its head and say, gee, I'm sorry, I made a decision to do this and lead in this way, right? And so it's a matter of helping some of these women understand the value that you bring to society. Doesn't mean it has to have always been on a linear trajectory. And in fact, you're more valuable, I believe, because you did conscientiously step out and say, I'm going to go do it this way. And you're doing that.
I mean, I think that you are so right, but I think that you know that. But I think that generally speaking, we are punished. I have so many friends that decided to step out and be with their kids, and now they cannot go back in. They can't, and they're so frustrated. And I feel like that's why many women do what I did, which is like make up a new path as I went, and not even knowing what the obstacles were. Like, I have a dear friend who's brilliant, who used to work at the World Bank. She had a PhD in economics, and she stayed home for a few years, not even a decade. She couldn't go back in because by the time she wanted to go back in, there were younger people that were willing to take much less money, that were willing, because, she already had done this and had done that. And there were people that were willing to do it and she switched, and she went to study landscaping, and now she loves it. She has her own business, and
she's leading.
Yes, but it was very hard for her. And I have other examples of people who just haven't been able to go back. But it pushes women to be entrepreneurial, as you're saying. Now
I have to say this is the system. I've never thought about this before, Devry, before talking to you today. We are in the business of recruiting and hiring people.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of them every year, thousands of them every year. And I'll bet you one thing. I mean, once we hang up, I'm going to go back to this, but our system is not designed precisely to take this into account. It is not. It is designed, the process, the recruiting and hiring process is designed so if you see gaps, is watch out. This is a negative sign. It is
a problem. I mean, yes, they quit. They didn't
so
work
I'm guilty of that. We'll get
they kids. So whenever something happens, you can count on them. If that, I agree. We're penalized.
Yeah.
Penalized.
And then and here's what I think you're first of all, Emilio, thank you for having this conversation because you are a trendsetter. You're on the cusp of where I believe society is going and the job market will follow. Is we're at this point in time, that HR manager, by the way, that didn't hire your friend, lost a phenomenal asset. And she went on and proved, okay, women in the face of crisis, we're gonna go innovate, we're gonna go figure it out. You've done it, you're leading. I'm out here as leading my own company as a CEO, and a lot of people say, wait, you left the corporate infrastructure, you know, you're at the top of the house. And I just said, but it wasn't working, right? Like by coming out and starting my own thing on my own terms, I know that I can scale change much more effectively across the corporate world. So women, in my observation, take risks in their career. They just don't realize it's risks. And HR is a huge part of this, Emilio, where we've got to redefine what we need in terms of value from the individual. And and
I think
you got to tell their stories for them because they feel like
it's got to be leadership. I think HR is the consequence of leadership and the philosophy of leadership, and it's implemented by the HR, let me say, process and procedures. But it's got to be beyond that, because I think also the corporate office lost when you left because it did not create the environment where you can have this sustainable growth, sustainable from this point of view that we're talking about, where you feel you're growing as an individual, but that you have also are gaining the other things that are interesting for you in life. And I think the redefinition of success is one of the most important things we need to do in order to be successful on this issue of diversity and inclusion. Because if success continues to be painted the same way in terms of the economics, and I think this is the failure of capitalism, which I still believe is the best alternative we have going on, assuming that we are able to innovate it. But if return on the economic side, because I think it is return, but it's a multi-dimensional return that we have to look at. Also, when we are working for a company or when we are leading a business and when we're making these decisions, I think the redefinition of success is the most urgent thing we need to have.
It's exciting.
So, Emilio, for example, like you're saying, in your position where your company gets to hire hundreds and hundreds of women or of people, what do you think that it would take for there to be that change in perception, that if you see a gap in someone's resume, there's a problem? Like, what do you think, where do you think like an immediate solution could be, where what would need to be told to the people hiring, or what would need to happen for there to be a change? Like, are women looking back for reentry? Do they need to be willing to get more technological training? Technology, as you were saying, Devry, even I feel like I keep getting left behind with technology all the time. Is it technology? Is it being willing to take less money to jump in again? Like, what do you think?
I think I'm going to say a combination, but I think there is a process. The first one is I think it needs to come from leadership. Like, we're talking about digital transformation. It doesn't happen on the edge. It happens when the CEO of the organization is convinced that this is the way the world needs to change. And I think it goes back to leadership. That's why the more women we have, the better off we're going to be. or the more women skills, going back to Simon Sinek's comment, the better are we going to be, because it starts with philosophy. But then I think it has to turn into policy inside the company, and for the leadership to say, we are going to eliminate the question or the policy where gap is a problem. Like we have right now, for example, in Mexico, which I think is a good progress, to say to political parties, 50% of the candidates you present as a political party have to be women.
Wow.
So I think you have to go from from philosophy to policy, because when you talk about change management, the most powerful change management is conviction, when you're convinced that this has to do, but it's not the most efficient, because it doesn't happen very often. So you need to also put some rules into place, like it happens with compliance. It would be ideal that we didn't need to have all these rules of compliance, because companies would be ethical, but the truth is that it's not. We need to put policy in place so there is a collective behavior that is better for everybody. So I think it has to start with philosophy on the corporation, and then implemented as policy. And it has to be hand in hand with education of the HR team, of the managers, because we have a lot of problems also when we also have policy, but at the end of the day, if the person making the decision, and you are deciding between a man and a woman, the leader says, I'm going to go this direction because of the DNA of this cultural baggage that we have, Pati. So I think
I'm going to go out for a drink with these guys,
Yeah.
It's also that idea that maybe you can bond more, you can, and with men and women, there's always that fine line, It's complicated.
One thing, just, go ahead, Emilio.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing. I love that you asked, like, what can we do that's tangible? And I have a feeling that after this conversation, we're gonna get that list together. But in the context, could I also talk about it in the context of like US-Mexico relations for just a minute, Emilio? Because that's what we all work on, and we know that maintaining connectivity between these two economies is absolutely critical for the well-being of our people on all sides. One tangible thing that I think businesses can do, and government's difficult, but we can talk about it in a second, is take a look at their board makeup. I've talked to you about this, because you can have what you call philosophy and or what I call leadership intent. But to get that leadership intent and then that policy and then those outcomes out the door, it takes a lot of courage. And the courage has to come from support from your leader, your board. And if you take a look around, we've been making a push as women to get on boards. Well, what's challenging about that is to accelerate that progress, we've got to change the perception. A lot like the gap in the resume, we have to change the perception of whether women would be valuable on these boards, because the companies often go, well, gee, we want someone prominent who's had a CEO position. Well, go and look at how many women are in the CEO positions. And in the food industry, it's like I could count them on my hands, and we keep losing them. So we have to redefine what it means to be a valuable board member. And I think this is a way, in terms of US-Mexico relations, we can help. Because not only should we be looking at ways to put women on boards in Mexico and in the United States, but we could look and say, are there some talented Mexican women that should go on boards of US companies, and are there talented US women that should go on boards of Mexican companies? Because once you do that, you're solidifying that cross-border relationship in a way that it hasn't been solidified before.
Yeah, and I think in this case, when we talk about the bilateral relationship, Devry, I think the US can help a lot. And the reason why Enrique Perret, who all we know and of course respect tremendously, who leads the US-Mexico Foundation, has insisted, for example, on this, is Mexican companies need to believe in boards, because the majority of our companies don't have boards. So I think it's different lines that we have to be working at in order to move to this ultimate dimension of diversity and inclusion. And I think, in my opinion, if companies don't change, and if we don't start with the women's side, because I believe, again, it's 50% of the world, then to talk about minorities is, for me, almost impossible, because it's just so evident that we're not taking the first steps possible. And that's why I think this is extremely relevant. We have 9 minutes left for our conversation, and of course we're going to, this is recorded, so we're going to be able to share with a lot of people. That's the idea. Any closing comments, Pati, from your side? And I think I would like for you to talk about this re-education of men, if possible, on your closing remarks, because I think it is very important.
I mean, I see it generationally in my family. You know, I come from a family where my father, you know, he's a charmer, he's a great dad, we did grow up in a world where there was a role for women and there was a role for men. And we learn from example and we learn from mistakes as well, you know, and I really try for my boys to be supporters of women and supporters of the job that women do. And I always try to lead by example and for them to understand that, you know, what I do and what their father do is just as important without hiding the female vulnerabilities, you know? So we are different. And I can't pretend, and I know these may not be very productive for me to say, but I do feel that we have certain vulnerabilities, just as we are stronger in nurturing and we are great at multitasking. You know, like I don't hide my women or maternal or whatever it may be vulnerabilities, but I try to shine a light on the strengths to that. Like, I don't think it's useful for women to pretend that we can be just as men, because in the kitchen, no, I can't carry the same amount of boxes. I can't. Even if I train 3 hours a day, I'm kind of fatigued, you know. So I can, you know, be on par with guys in the kitchen to a certain degree, and of course in execution and ideas and creativeness and flavors, but I know I can't carry half a cow, you know. So I feel that there's wisdom in saying, how are we saying that we are equal, or that we have the right and that we can execute just as well without covering things that are true about who we are. And I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but I think that we should be proud about those differences, and that's what I try to do by example with my kids. And so far they're super supportive of women, and I feel that we need to have partners in men, that they need to see the benefits of supporting women, so they get better food if they're supportive. It's not because, you know, I prize them like a carrot or a stick, but it's, you know, if you feel appreciated, if you feel like you have a team, you want to give back, you want to. So anyway, I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense.
It's fantastic. I love the fact that you mentioned some of the skills that you're saying that women have, which I agree. And if you look at, you know, the World Economic Forum, and you look at the new skills required in the workplace, all of them are in there on the new skills required for this new normality. And I think, fortunately, technology in this confinement that we've been forced, I think opens, so it takes out some of the barriers that we had on what had to be needed for somebody to be in the office every single hour of the day and staying late. I think that's going to help for the cause if we actually take this experience and make it part of a learning and culture.
Yeah. One thing, Emilio, in what I was saying about trying not to mask the things that are us, in order to get equality. Like, for example, I feel that a lot of women get pressured into saying that no, they don't want to get married, or no, they don't want to have kids, or no, they don't want, in order to get that position. And I think that the system should reward, and say, yes, I will get married or not, or yes, I want to have kids, but that will not impact my commitment, my responsibility, how I deliver, so I just feel that because men can't get pregnant, right? So in a way, admitting to like our differences and what we want or what we don't want, and I think should not be an obstacle to. We shouldn't
Correct.
have to pretend.
No,
Devry,
I'm smiling because everything you're saying is resonating, and I think about this, the experiences we've had when, for example, when I was pregnant, and I get into the elevator with somebody who knows my job. It's a big job, and he says to me, "Oh my gosh, how are you going to have kids and also do your job at the same time?" And I looked at him and said, "Well, how do you do it?" Right? Like, excuse me, what an inappropriate question, first of all. But second of all, how do you have kids and work at the same time? And then thinking about the interviews that I had with people who were pursuing me for roles, and they found out I was pregnant. Gee. But the one woman who pursued me, who was chairwoman of a global law firm, still pursued me and said that she would pay my maternity leave. Right?
Oh my
and so
God.
that's the difference in dealing with women in the workplace. And I've coached so many young women who've said, "Am I going to have my role when I get back?" And I just kind of smile and try to help them settle in. Like, of course you're going to have your role, and you're going to have more of it, because while you're gone, everyone's going to realize how valuable you were. So, my closing.
So we need more people like Devry. We need more people like you. That's what we need.
This is what I was going to say is, I deliberately took the risk to come out and use the next 20 years of my career because to work on this, because I know this is the direction that it's going. And the logo of my company, I told Emilio, is the purple poppy, and so people go, "That's a nice flower." It's based on something incredibly fundamental to women, and it's something that women experience in the work world when they're like you, Patty. They stand up, they stand out, they're visible, they're breaking cultural barriers. And all of a sudden, somebody says to them, "You're too visible." Well, there's this notion of a tall poppy syndrome, and they use it a lot in international business. If you're too tall and you're making everyone else look bad, then we need to cut you off to make you average. And I'm sorry, when you've got these highly qualified women who are stepping up in the work world and being told they're too visible, that's the cultural barrier we have to come up against. So for me, this is a personal mission, the Purple Poppy, and founding the Purple Poppy Institute, which is focused on the express purpose of the Purple Poppy Institute is to elevate women into the senior most roles in business and in government. Because the way we change society is by allowing these women to stand up and stand out, and allowing them to take these top positions.
When you started your comment, Devry,
I love
the fact that you said that what Patty was saying is resonating, because the male answer and my answer would have been, "You're right, Patty, this is the way." So it's like, this is looks like a small detail, but it's not. It's not this male position on "you're right" or "you're wrong." Your comment was, it's resonating, and this is much more deeper and much more transformational than a position of saying "you're right" or "you are wrong." And I think that's what this female energy on leadership positions, which is what we're talking about, and of course this possibility of everybody deciding and having choices in life is beautiful. But when we're talking about leadership positions, I think this is why we need more people like you. And I truly believe I'm blessed and thankful for having the opportunity of talking to both of you today. I do know, because I know you personally, that the world is a better place because you are here, Devry, and because you're here, Patty. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Emilio, because you're here.
Yes, Emilio, absolutely. I was
also
thinking
believe so.
You know, after our conversation yesterday, I thought that Emilio is such a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
You know,
And he
we
dropped
need
off.
more men that are Renaissance men. Yes. Oh,
He just dropped off, and so
No,
his
no, no, no.
advice.
I'm here. I'm
His
here.
advice
No,
to
no.
me is the
I
technology
don't know.
field.
I picked. Clicked on my camera off, but no. I also believe, and I think that we have to be okay with that. I do think I'm important for the world too, and I think
Yes, you
recognizing as an individual to be valuable, I think is part of what we have to be taught to say it's okay. My wife is Argentinian, and I've learned this from her, saying it's okay to say I look good today. It's not that I'm being arrogant. It's just that why not? Exactly. So I do believe that we are good for the world. I think what we are, the three of us, what the US-MexicoFoundation is doing, what our businesses are doing. And I think we need to be more contagious than COVID-19 in these type of things.
Yeah,
we
I
need
like
to make sure that we send the message out. And I know that because of today, something changes. And I do think that small changes become collective changes that we're going to be proud of. Like, fortunately, today women can vote, and 100 years ago they couldn't. So I think there is hope on transformation, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to have done this today. Honestly.
Thank you, Emilio.
thank you, Emilio.
And
Devry,
Pat,
if I can help anything with any of your efforts, you're doing so many amazing things.
Same
Please
here.
come in.
Emilio, I've been watching her television show, and I think I said this before. Your show is going to bridge divides like nobody in terms of the ability to bring Mexican culture and the essence of the Mexican people to the US in a way that is going to resonate. And so as we have challenges in the bilateral relationship and our governments continue to spar, your work is even more important.
Thank you so much, Devry. I feel like I have a mission, and I only hope for many more years of life to continue to do it.
We'll do it together.
Yes, 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 yes.
Let's keep talking, and that goes also for people listening to us and who would listen to this video and this conversation in the future. We got to make sure we keep talking and understanding each other better. Thank you, both of you, so much.
Thank you.
Joel, also talking about women leadership, the other person behind this initiative, Joel from Prodensa, fantastic.
Joel, bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we're done. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.